Hello, and welcome back. This video is about managing the slot save game slot. And a special thanks to all my supporters. Thank you for helping me help others. Much like the C++ save game logic from a few videos ago, we first need to subclass save game, but this time as a blueprint. I'm going to call this BP slot save game. Now, I'm calling this slot save game because in this system, we have 3 slots that the player can choose to save to. It's a little ambiguous because we're also using the Unreal's save game to slot functionality, so keep that in mind. So in here, we're just going to add a new variable. We'll call this completed levels. We'll make this an integer array. This will just be a list of the level indices that have been completed. This could also be an array of bools where the index matches the level. You could also do the same approach if you had other data that you want to save per level, like a score or a star system. Though if you have more than 2 bits of information, I'd suggest making a struct to hold that info and using either an array with level index or a map of level index to the struct. With that done, we'll move to the game instance. And we'll create a few functions, starting with load slot. So we're going to start by calling load game from slot. As a reminder, we're leaving the user index as 0, and we're calling our internal C++ function get save slot name. And that function requires the index, which is also a C++ function, get save slot. Once we have that save object, we need to cast it, and that'll be to our slot save game. And then with that, we're going to get the completed levels and promote that to a variable, also called completed levels, or complete, rather. So that's loading the information, or very little bit of information. We also need a save slot. For that, we first call create save game object. We tell it which type of save game we want, which is our slot save game blueprint. We use that to set the completed levels from this data that we just made. And then we send that along to save game to slot. Again, the slot name is the one we just did, save slot name from get save slot index. And that should be successful, but just in case, we'll add a print. Failed to save slot save game. Now, since we're basically maintaining the content of the save game slot in our game instance here, we then want to load it at our first opportunity. As a reminder, in C++, we overrode the init function. We can do again here. We can search for init. There's a lot of entries. You can search for init event or event init. And based on what I just said, we have it in C++. In C++, it's calling the super, the parent version. In blueprints, we have to ensure that we do the same thing. So we can right click on here, add call to parent function. Make sure it gets called. And then we can load slot. So this parent is effectively our C++ version, which we'll call the load meta function. And we want that logic to happen before load slot because load slot's save slot name is based on what we get from there. And that's all we need to do. So thanks for watching, and I'm just kidding. We have the save logic, but we need to hook up the functionality to a few other areas to make it all work together. We'll start by creating a few more functions in our game instance. On play level, I will use up here because we already wrote it. So the point of on play level is when in the UI you click on the button to play that level, and the end result is we're going to call open level. We're going to send in a name, but how do we get the name to that point? So we're going to create a variable here. We'll call this level names. And this we can actually just make a name type. This will also be an array. This would be better to have a little more data driven, maybe in a data table or something. But the problem is if we had it in a data table, then we would also have to have something pointing to the row name of the data table. So in this case, our index will point to the name. So we know that in our level select screen, we created 7 buttons. So we'll compile to get this here and then just add 7 buttons. And if we go back into our content browser here, go to our levels, we can see this name is level-01. I'll just hit F2, copy that. And in here, I can just paste this. We're not going to make any more levels for right now, so we'll just put this in everywhere so the functionality exists. So with that, we take our array we want to get. We do not need a reference. Just getting a copy of the name, and this is based on the index that we're sending in. So if this were a string type, we could just do an isEmpty. A call to isEmpty. We don't have that because it's a name, so we'll just compare it to empty. And since we don't want empty, we'll just throw in a not bool. Get rid of the print up here. And for all that, we just need a branch. And when the branch is true, we're going to do 2 things. First of all, we want to save this index because the level itself will have no concept of what index it is. So we save that as our current level. So we can just right click here, promote to variable, call it current level. Pop that over here. And I'm just going to actually make a copy of this one so it looks a little less messy. And lastly, we set the level name based on that entry. And that should be good to go. Next, we're going to create an onLevelComplete function. And again, because we're saving the current level, all we need to be doing here is get our completed levels array. We're going to add. It's an array, not a map, so we're going to have to ensure that we add unique. And we're just going to throw the current level in like that. And then save the data. Save the data, save the world. We're going to throw in another function here called onMainMenu. This will be in the case where we're somewhere else in the game and we want to get back to the main menu. All this is doing is calling open level. We're using an object reference in this case because we'd want to just select our main menu level. And lastly, a little accessor type function called isLevelComplete. This will send in an index. And all it's doing is getting our completed levels, finding out if it contains. One day I'll name that, type that correctly. The index we send in. And we're just sending out a return node with that Boolean value. Next up, we want to ensure that the onLevelComplete is called when we win, not lose, a level. So that was in our game mode. Under game ended, as long as we win, we can set that value. So first we're going to get isWin. And we're going to branch based off that. If it's true, then we're getting game instance from the function library and using that to call on level complete. Now we can also update our summary widget a little bit. It's our WBP summary. So let's take our play again button. We'll wrap this in a horizontal box. Going to then just duplicate it, rename it to main menu button. Make the text main menu. We'll throw in a spacer. There it is. And we'll just make the spacer, what do we want, 100? Actually 200. So we'll make the horizontal box, because the button was originally 600, or 200, we'll make it 600. And for the main menu button, we want to have an on click, which then calls our game instance on main menu. Lastly, in our level select blueprint, widget blueprint, which is in our main menu, we want to go into the graph here. In our construct, we're just going to create a new function. Call this process buttons. Make sure it gets called. I'm actually going to leave this logic for here now. I don't like it, but we're going to create an array and add all the buttons to it and then iterate through it. So if you want, just copy this and put it in there as well. So for that, we need a new variable. We'll call this level select button slots. This is taking in our WBP level select button. And this is an array. So for this, we're just calling add. And we're going to drag in each button. So unlike the logic in the other screen, if I did this and then drag there, it will not do the same thing it was doing with the bind event stuff. It won't just replicate it for each entry, so we do have to manually do this. For that, I can just copy this and paste it 6 times. And make sure I drag in each button properly and in order. Feels like there should be a better way to do this, but I'm not sure what it is. Oops, holding down shift when I was doing that. Don't know why that one's highlighted. Didn't miss a thing now. So we have all that done. We're going to get game instance. We're going to be using it in a loop, so we're just going to create a local variable. Call pp game instance. And then with the array we just filled, we can call for each. Now I swear this index wasn't always here, but it's very handy. So for each of these, I'm just going to promote this to a local variable. We'll call it level select button slot. I'm going to create a new Boolean local variable. We'll call it is enabled. This will be a single and type Boolean. And we're just dragging it out here to set it to true. That's so that we can run a sequence. And the end result of that sequence will be our level button, level select button slot. We're just calling set is enabled with this value. So not surprisingly, we're setting it to true. We're doing something up here which potentially will set it to false. And what might potentially set it to false, you wonder? We're getting our slot. From that, we're getting our index prerequisites, which is an array. So we're going to for each loop through that array. We're getting our game instance, and we're calling is level complete. And we're setting along that array element. It is important you choose array element, not index. Because as a reminder, when we set up the buttons, we're just setting or adding to the array what the prerequisites are. And then we have a branch here. In the case where a prerequisite index is not level complete, we then want to set our is enabled here to false. And with all that done, we can go into our project settings finally, find our maps and modes, and set our starter or editor and game default starter map. So we'll set the main menu level here. Once one of these is in, you can then browse to it. This window is hiding the other. It's selected, but you can't see it. But then you can select the one that's, or use the one that is selected. So it's a little quicker to do it that way instead of finding it twice. Now that was for the editor loading it on default. Since we're already loaded, it's not loaded here. We can just double click that again to get that loaded. So with that done, we're going to hit play. We can go to our level select, click on the first entry here. You can see that all of these are disabled because they have prerequisites, and those prerequisites were not in the completed levels. So we click this one, we throw out a few towers. Too many towers, but nonetheless, it's a little quicker. And when we win the level, you have the option of playing again because this level is the pinnacle of tower defense excitement, or you can click main menu. When you're back in the main menu, you can go back to level select, and here we go. We've now completed this level, which was the prerequisite for this level, and now this one is enabled. So if we then quickly go in here and do the same, I'll just overload it with some turrets and a ballista. Man, that's a really challenging game. When that's done, we go back to main menu, level select, and there we go. This one has been completed, so those ones are now available. We'll just assume the rest is working. If we go back here and I select a different save slot, it's currently on 3, set it to 2, go back to level select, you can see that it's not working. This is because when we changed the level select, we didn't load the new data. So let's fix that. So that is happening in our select save slot. What we're doing here is when the button's pressed, we're calling set save slot, and we're just literally sending that value. Yeah, since this was a C++ function, we can't actually just call save slot here. A few ways you can get around that. The first is we could add a on set save slot call in here, and that would be a blueprint implementable event. You could do it there. However, another way to fix this is we could make another function in the blueprint that's like this, that would then call this specific function and the save slot. I'm just going to do it a little simpler and a little more coupled, but I'm just going to manually call save slot here. Then we can throw that at the end because the button text doesn't interrupt it. And I'll just copy paste that down here. And when we try that, we look at our save slot, it's actually set to 2. So when we go to level select, it has reset, go back, set it to 3, and back in our level select, we see it's not working again, and that's because we didn't actually load the new slot. And that's because I was thinking of it backwards. These should actually be load slot, not save slot. So now we're in 3, we go into our level select, go into 2. All right, so the issue now is probably that I overwrote the save with the starter data, so I'm just gonna get it back to where it was, and then get back to the video. And we're back, or you're still here. So I had forgotten that in our game instance, in our init, we're calling the super version that we're calling load main. In the super version of init, which is game instance, click on that, hit F12. You can see that it's doing some stuff. It's calling ReceiveInit as one of its first things. I mean, it doesn't matter the order. It's calling ReceiveInit. So what is ReceiveInit? If you hit F12 on that, you can see that ReceiveInit is the blueprint implementable event init. I did actually call this out in the other video, but I forgot the order was messed. Or I forgot that our order would have been messed up. So effectively what we're doing back in here is we're calling the init event before we're calling load main. So for our scenario, we actually need to move load main above the super version. Now it's not the only way to fix it. Again, with the other issue, we could have just had like an on load or on init and use that as an event instead. But this shouldn't cause any problems. Alternatively, you could also just rename this init function, not have it as an override. And then when init gets called normally, the blueprint event version would be called, and then it could call this version. With that done, I'll see you back in the editor. So back in the editor, if we go to our game instance and we go to load slot, we can put a breakpoint well there or over here. When we hit play, load slot's getting called. Load main should have been called first, which will set our save slot appropriately. And as you can see here, this is set to 2 instead of 0, which is giving us the name save slot 3. I'll remove that and continue. So then there's actually one other issue. If I choose a slot that doesn't currently have a save, we click on that, we go into our load slot. It's going to load the game from slot, but then it's going to be loading from a slot that doesn't have a save. So we're going to end up on cast failed instead. So basically what I missed doing is completed levels is not going to get overridden in a case where we choose a slot that has no data. So what that means is in here, we want to then pop that out, call clear, and have that as the first thing in our load slot. So now again, when we run it, we look at our save slot, it's on 2 currently, which has no data. So if we hit level select, no data. If we then go and choose save slot 3, we go back and it has the data. Just to double check again, we'll choose then 1, which has no data, and level select is reset again. So while I could have edited out those mistakes and bugs and whatever and just fix them on my own, it can be good to also include that in the video because you can see, first of all, I'm human. I might also make mistakes, even though I have a lot of experience with coding. I can make mistakes. Yeah, so even if you're making your own mistakes, on the plus side, other people make mistakes. On the negative side, you can look forward to always making mistakes. Anyhow, Thanks for watching. If you liked the video and would like to see more, you know what to do. And if you would like to support this channel, watch these videos 2 weeks early, or just want to download the project files, you can do so through my Patreon linked below.